Evan Thompson, a brilliant Canadian philosopher, has become an essential bridge between cognitive science, phenomenology, and Buddhist philosophy. His interdisciplinary approach has given him a distinctive voice in answering some of the most profound questions humanity has ever pondered. Have you ever stopped to wonder, what does it truly mean to be conscious? What is the nature of the self, and how does it come into being? By drawing from both Western scientific traditions and Eastern contemplative practices, particularly Buddhism, Thompson has carved out a unique and profound path of understanding. His work challenges traditional, often reductionist, views of consciousness that have dominated modern science and philosophy. Isn't it exciting to think of how revolutionary his ideas are? His contributions are not confined to just the theoretical realm, they span across philosophy, science, and even practical inquiries into the human condition. Thompson delves deeply into the nature of the self, the critical role the body plays in shaping our experiences, and how meditative practices can provide profound insights into how the mind operates. His philosophical ideas intersect beautifully with Buddhist thought and cognitive science, pulling these disparate domains together in a way that forces us to reconsider the very essence of consciousness and the self. Could there be a more fascinating area of inquiry? Let's dive deeper into his work. Examining how his ideas intersect with both Buddhist philosophy and cognitive science, and explore what this means for understanding consciousness, academic foundation and philosophical approach. Thompson's intellectual foundation is grounded in phenomenology, a philosophical tradition that places emphasis on the very structures of experience and consciousness itself. Doesn't it make you think? What exactly are the structures of our experiences? Building on the works of phenomenologists like Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Thompson emphasizes the concept of embodiment. The mind isn't separate from the body. Instead, consciousness is deeply linked to our physical and social worlds. This concept, though seemingly simple, has profound implications for how we view the mind. The mind is not some abstract, isolated entity, detached from the world around it. No, it is intimately connected with our lived, bodily experience. Thompson's approach allows him to critique traditional cognitive science, which often treats the mind as a kind of computational system, much like a computer, processing information in isolation. But doesn't this analogy feel limiting? Thompson certainly thinks so, and instead, he champions the idea that cognition is inherently embodied and shaped by the environment. This revolutionary position is known as enactivism. According to this view, cognition arises through the dynamic interaction between the organism and its surroundings. It's almost as if our very thoughts are born out of the relationship between ourselves and the world around us. How incredible is that? His seminal work The Embodied Mind, Cognitive Science and Human Experience, 1991, co-authored with Francisco Varela and Eleanor Roche, laid the groundwork for this enactivist view. The text argues that cognition cannot be understood without taking into account the lived, bodily experience of individuals. Thompson and his co-authors suggest that consciousness does not arise from some disembodied, computational processes, but from the way we, as embodied beings, engage with the world. Isn't this idea captivating? This approach challenges deeply held assumptions and resonates with Buddhist philosophy, which similarly challenges the notion of an independent, permanent self. Buddhism and cognitive science, a deep interplay. Thompson's engagement with Buddhist philosophy is not just a superficial comparison between two schools of thought. No, it goes much deeper than that. He's deeply invested in how Buddhist teachings on the mind, consciousness, and the self can inform and challenge the assumptions made in cognitive science. Buddhist philosophy offers a radically different perspective on the self, one that denies the existence of a permanent, unchanging self. In Buddhism, the self is not some fixed entity. Instead, it's viewed as a dynamic, ever-changing process. Isn't it fascinating to think that the very notion of self could be a fleeting, transient thing? This concept of non-self, anatta, is central to Buddhist philosophy and aligns beautifully with Thompson's enactivist views, which also deny the existence of a fixed, isolated self. He believes cognitive science stands to gain a lot by engaging with Buddhist thought, particularly in understanding consciousness. While Western science often focuses on third-person, objective observations, like brain scans and behavioral studies, Buddhism emphasizes first-person, subjective experiences, especially those explored in meditative practices. Doesn't it make sense that to truly understand the mind, we need to look both inside and out? Meditation, a cornerstone of Buddhist practice, is central to Thompson's inquiry into consciousness. For centuries, Buddhist practitioners have used meditation to observe the ebb and flow of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Through meditation, they've explored the nature of the self and consciousness in ways that offer profound insights that can complement the empirical methods used in cognitive science. It's thrilling to think about the possibilities of these two traditions coming together, isn't it? One area where this dialogue is particularly fruitful is in the study of mindfulness. In recent years, mindfulness has become a hot topic in scientific research, particularly in psychology and neuroscience. Researchers have found that mindfulness can have remarkable effects on the brain, improving attention, emotional regulation, and even physical health. But Thompson cautions us here, mindfulness isn't just a tool for self-improvement. He argues that to fully understand mindfulness, we must consider its broader philosophical context within Buddhism, which emphasizes ethical conduct, compassion, and the cultivation of wisdom. How much richer does mindfulness seem when placed in this broader context? Consciousness and the self, a process, not a thing. A major contribution Thompson has made to the philosophy of mind is his exploration of consciousness and the self as dynamic processes, not static entities. This idea, one that is profoundly influenced by both phenomenology and Buddhist philosophy, challenges the traditional notion of a fixed, independent self. How many of us go through life assuming our self is stable and unchanging? Thompson's work pushes us to reconsider this assumption and to see the self as fluid, constantly evolving in response to experiences and the environment. Isn't that an exciting revelation? In his book Waking, Dreaming, Being, Self and Consciousness in Neuroscience, Meditation, and Philosophy, 2015, Thompson explores the nature of the self through the lens of different states of consciousness, such as waking life, dreams, and meditative states. He argues that the self isn't a fixed thing but is constantly being constructed and deconstructed in different states of awareness. Doesn't this idea feel incredibly liberating? It echoes the Buddhist concept of anatta, the idea that the self is an illusion, a construct of the mind that arises from our tendency to grasp for stability in a constantly changing world. Thompson introduces the concept of the minimal self to describe the most basic level of self-awareness that persists even in these altered states. The minimal self is a pre-reflective sense of being aware, a fundamental consciousness that doesn't involve the complex narratives and identities we typically associate with the self. In Buddhist meditation, this minimal self is often experienced as a form of pure awareness, free from the mental constructions that define our waking sense of self. Isn't it fascinating to think that underneath all the layers of our identity lies this minimal self? Just pure awareness, this understanding of the self as a process rather than a thing challenges the traditional Western view of the self as a stable, unchanging identity. It opens up exciting new possibilities for understanding mental illness, personal identity, and even ethical behavior. If the self is not a fixed entity, many of the problems we associate with rigid identity, attachment, fear of loss, even prejudice, can be seen as mistaken perceptions. What a transformative way of thinking about the self and our place in the world. Neurophenomenology, bridging first-person and third-person perspectives. One of Thompson's most significant contributions to cognitive science is his development of neurophenomenology. This approach seeks to bridge the gap between first-person experiences, such as the subjective experience of consciousness, and third-person scientific observations, such as brain scans or behavioral studies. Isn't it incredible to think that these two perspectives could be united? For too long, cognitive science has neglected the richness of first-person perspectives, focusing almost exclusively on objective, measurable phenomena. While this focus has led to significant advances in understanding the brain, it has left out the lived experiences that are so crucial to understanding consciousness. Thompson's Neurophenomenology integrates phenomenological methods, detailed descriptions of lived experiences, with empirical research in neuroscience. By combining the strengths of both approaches, Thompson believes we can gain a more complete understanding of consciousness, one that respects both the complexity of subjective experience and the rigor of objective science. Isn't this the kind of holistic approach we've been waiting for? Ethical and social implications of Thompson's work. Thompson's ideas don't just stay within the realm of abstract philosophy, they have profound ethical and social implications. If the self is not a fixed, independent entity but a process arising from our interactions with the world, how does that change the way we relate to others? Doesn't it naturally lead to a greater sense of compassion and responsibility toward others? In Buddhist philosophy, the realization of non-self is often accompanied by the development of compassion for all beings. The boundaries between self and other are seen as illusory, and the dissolution of the self leads to a greater recognition of interconnectedness. Thompson's work echoes this, inviting us to reconsider how our understanding of the mind and the self affects our ethical relationships. If we no longer see ourselves as isolated individuals, we may be more likely to act out of empathy and compassion. Isn't that the kind of shift our world desperately needs? Thompson emphasizes that ethical conduct is not just a secondary concern but is deeply connected to our understanding of consciousness. In Buddhist thought, the realization of interconnectedness naturally leads to ethical principles like compassion, non-harming, and generosity. These aren't simply moral rules, they arise from a deep understanding of the nature of reality. Thompson argues that Western philosophy and cognitive science can benefit from incorporating these ethical insights. What if our understanding of consciousness could lead us to a more compassionate, empathetic society? Critique of modern cognitive science and the misuse of mindfulness. Thompson doesn't shy away from critiquing modern cognitive science. He's particularly critical of its tendency to reduce consciousness to purely neurological terms. While neuroscience has made great strides in understanding the brain, it often overlooks the richness of subjective experience. How can we fully understand consciousness without also studying it from the inside, from the perspective of lived experience? One of Thompson's main critiques is the way mindfulness has been appropriated in modern psychology and neuroscience. Mindfulness has become widely popular in the West as a tool for stress reduction, emotional regulation, and even productivity. But Thompson warns us, this approach strips mindfulness of its broader philosophical and ethical context. Mindfulness isn't just a tool for self-optimization, it's part of a larger path toward awakening and ethical conduct. Isn't it important to remember that, in its original Buddhist context, mindfulness is closely connected to wisdom and compassion? Thompson emphasizes that when mindfulness is practiced correctly, it challenges the very foundations of the modern consumerist mindset. Mindfulness, he argues, shouldn't just be used to enhance productivity or reduce stress. Instead, it should lead to a re-evaluation of the values that underlie high-stress environments in the first place. What if mindfulness could transform society by challenging the narratives of self-interest and competition, Buddhism, and the dissolution of the ego? One of the most profound ways that Thompson's work intersects with Buddhist philosophy is in his exploration of the dissolution of the ego. In Buddhism, the ego, the sense of a fixed, independent self, is considered an illusion that leads to suffering. The belief in a permanent self causes attachment, fear, and aversion, all of which contribute to suffering. Isn't it fascinating how much this mirrors our modern anxieties? Through meditation and mindfulness practices, Buddhists seek to dissolve the ego, realizing that the self is impermanent and interconnected with all of existence. Thompson's philosophy aligns closely with this view. He argues that the self is not an entity but a process, constantly in flux, shaped by bodily sensations, mental activities, and environmental interactions. This process-oriented view of the self challenges the traditional Western notion of the ego as a stable, unchanging core of identity. How liberating is that? Thompson's exploration of consciousness and the self encourages us to rethink our assumptions about personal identity, freedom, and ethical responsibility. If the ego is an illusion, many of the problems we associate with protecting and promoting the self, competition, greed, and attachment, lose their foundation. Could Thompson's work inspire us to live more compassionate, interconnected lives? Impact on contemporary thought and the future of cognitive science. Thompson's work has had a significant impact on contemporary philosophy, cognitive science, and contemplative studies. His interdisciplinary approach, combining insights from Western philosophy, cognitive science, and Buddhist thought, has opened up new avenues for understanding consciousness, self-awareness, and the nature of the mind. Isn't it amazing to think of how these seemingly disparate fields can come together to create such profound insights? Thompson's recognition that subjective, first-person experiences must be integrated into scientific models of consciousness is a major departure from the traditional focus on objective, third-person data in cognitive science. His call for a neurophenomenological approach, combining subjective reports of experience with objective data, offers a more complete picture of the mind. This shift represents an exciting new frontier for cognitive science, one that respects both the complexity of subjective experience and the rigor of scientific measurement. Moreover, Thompson's engagement with Buddhist philosophy offers valuable ethical insights for the future of science and society. In a world increasingly driven by technology, consumerism, and individualism, Thompson's emphasis on interconnectedness, compassion, and the dissolution of the ego offers a powerful counter-narrative. By recognizing the fluid, interconnected nature of the self, Thompson encourages us to rethink our ethical responsibilities toward others and the planet. Isn't this exactly the kind of transformative thinking we need in today's world? Conclusion: a philosopher of consciousness and compassion, Thompson stands as one of the most important philosophers working at the intersection of cognitive science and Buddhist philosophy. His work challenges reductionist views of the mind, offering a more nuanced understanding of consciousness, one that incorporates both first-person experiences and third-person data. By bringing together phenomenology, cognitive science, and Buddhist teachings, Thompson has created a rich, interdisciplinary framework for exploring the nature of the mind, the self, and consciousness. Isn't it fascinating how these perspectives come together to create such a holistic understanding of the mind? Thompson's philosophical contributions extend beyond the realm of abstract theory. His work has practical implications for how we live our lives, how we treat others, and how we understand our place in the world. By challenging traditional notions of the self and ego, Thompson opens up new possibilities for ethical behavior, compassion, and interconnectedness. His engagement with Buddhist philosophy not only enriches our understanding of consciousness but also offers a powerful vision for a more compassionate and interconnected world. Could his ideas be the key to unlocking a more enlightened way of living? In an era where the boundaries between science and spirituality are increasingly blurred, Thompson's work provides a model for how these two domains can inform and enrich one another. His contributions to the philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and Buddhist studies will continue to shape the field for years to come, offering profound insights into the nature of consciousness and the human experience. Isn't it exhilarating to think of how much more there is to explore?